In a little less than 48 hours, the polls will open for voters to cast their ballots in the Michigan primary election. But before you go into the booth, you may want to hear what our guests have to say today. Our guests, Mark Brewer, chair of the Michigan Democratic Party, and Ron Weiser, chair of the Michigan Republican Party. On Tuesday, August 3rd, what's their plan for their parties getting the lion's share of the vote? It's Sunday, August the 1st. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. And we begin with Mark Brewer, chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. Mark, welcome back to Spotlight.
Thanks, Chuck. Glad to be here.
8 years Democrats have had the executive branch here in Michigan. I think the conventional wisdom out there is that's long enough. Economy hasn't been great. Give the other party a chance. How do you fight that type of sentiment out there as you're trying to run a campaign?
I think there's a couple of reasons, Chuck. First of all, this is a very competitive two-party state. And anybody who writes off the Democratic Party at any level, I think, is making a big mistake. Secondly, in the end, this is going to be about candidates, not about the last 8 years. It's going to be about the future.
You don't think it'll be about parties, too?
Well, it'll be about parties, but again, parties as embodied in their candidates. I mean, the candidates are the face of the party, and in this case, it'll be the gubernatorial candidates. And as you look at all these Republican candidates, they've all got very serious flaws. And one of the things that we have to do is make sure the voters are aware of those flaws, and that they weigh those flaws as they decide who they want to elect this fall. So I'm not worried about the conventional wisdom. We're prepared for a very competitive governor's race.
You confident that either Andy Dillon or Virg Bernero can take on whoever wins on the Republican side and maintain a Democrat in the executive branch?
Yes. I mean, again, I'm not making a prediction here. I don't do that. But again, it's going to be a very competitive race.
I know you're not going to take sides between the two of them. The two Democratic candidates.
They're both strong candidates. They've got their own strengths, and that we'll be happy to present to the voters no matter who wins the primary on Tuesday.
Who would you rather take on, regardless of whether or not it's Andy Dillon or Virg Bernero? Who on the Republican side do you think is the better matchup?
I really don't have a preference. We'll leave that to the Republican primary voters to choose. We've done our research on all of these Republican candidates, and as I said, they've all got very serious flaws as candidates. I think the voters are going to take a hard look at whether they want to trust them with the governorship in the next 8 years.
What kind of issues do you think will decide this race for Democrats or Republicans? What's going to be the key thing out there?
Well, the overriding issue, of course, is going to be jobs in the economy, and everything is linked to that. You know, how education can be improved to help people get better jobs and improve the economy, how health care can be improved in a way that benefits the economy. That's going to be the overriding issue. And so we're going to be taking a look at the records of these candidates. Maybe it's a Rick Snyder, who in the private sector made millions of dollars, the same time his company sent thousands of American jobs overseas. Is that the kind of guy we want to trust with being governor? The voters of Michigan just 4 years ago said they didn't want to trust Dick DeVos, who had a similar background in terms of shipping American jobs overseas. So they're all going to be looked at through that prism, through that lens of what they're going to do for the economy, and take a look at their record, take a look at what they've done, and that's a pretty good, gives you a pretty good idea of what they would do going forward.
On the Democratic side, what role do you see labor playing in all of this? Labor traditionally has been close to Democrats. Virg Bernero certainly has touted the fact in all of his ads that he has strong union support. But of course, Andy Dillon has also received some union backing here. What role overall do you think this is going to play as you go into November?
Labor is a very important part of our party, and we're very proud of that. I mean, organized labor in this state and nationally has done so much over the decades to stand up for the rights of all working people, not just their members. But we're a very broad party as well. We represent people who are small business people. We represent all the racial and ethnic diversity. That's Michigan. I think if you came to one of our conventions or you took a look at a typical Democratic Party meeting, you would see a party that looks like Michigan, that people can look at that party and say, I would be comfortable being a part of that party and voting for its candidates.
Do you get the sense that there's an anti-labor sentiment out here? Certainly it's being drummed on the Republican side by some of the candidates. Mike Bouchard makes no bones over the fact that he wants this to become a right-to-work state. That's liable to be a very volatile issue.
Well, what they're doing there is really playing to a small segment of the Republican primary electorate. I mean, they're in a very hotly contested Republican primary, and so this labor bashing and bashing of others as well that's going on in the Republican primary is pandering to their base. And when it comes to the general election, they're going to have to broaden that, and they may regret some of the things, a lot of the things that they've been saying over the course of this primary when they have to confront the broader electorate, including a lot of independent voters who don't cotton to that kind of conduct.
The Genesee County Democratic Committee pumped a lot of money into this campaign, particularly on behalf of Verge Bernero. If Verge Bernero becomes the Democrat that goes into November, is that something that may backfire on him because of that type of strong support from a particular PAC and from the Democratic Party? And
I don't think so at all. I mean,
a lot of that's union money.
There have been a lot of endorsements in our primary process, but I've been assured, I've talked to all of them, that we're all going to come together after the primary, whether it's Andy Dillon or Verge Bernero. We're going to unite behind that candidate and carry the Democratic banner forward. Primaries are always rough and tumble. People endorse, they spend money, they pick up sides. But in the end, if you compare either Andy Dillon or Verge Bernero to the alternative on the other side, Democrats will see that that's a very easy choice.
All right, we need to get to a commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the other stuff that will be on the ballot and things that you have to be concerned with as you head into November. We'll be right back with Mark Brewer, chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. We hope you stay with us. Mark Brewer, he's chair of the Michigan Democratic Party, our guest today on Spotlight. The Tea Party and organizations like Michigans for Common Sense, former Congressman Joe Swartz is involved in that. Bill Milliken, certainly a moderate Republican, has come out for Rick Snyder. What role do you see these individuals or organizations playing in this in a time when people are saying, I'm tired of maybe traditional Democrats and I'm tired of traditional Republican parties and I'm tired of partisanship?
Well, two things. First of all, it depends on whether they're able to reach people with their message. Right? I mean, this is a big state, 7 million registered voters, and so somebody can make an endorsement, but if nobody ever hears about it, it has no impact. So it's a question of resources. Specifically as to the Tea Party, that's basically a Republican organization. Time and again, you see that in terms of their positions, in terms of the research that's been done on who they are. That's just basically up the grassroots, the base of the Republican Party. And they're very much in the process, I understand, of trying to influence and take over the Republican Party. That may be a good question for Ron Weiser, your guest on the show. So those organizations, Tea Party specifically, part of the Republican Party, and it's not really a factor in our equation.
All right, what else are you concerned with as you head into November? Because certainly you have more than the governor's race. You've got Secretary of State, you've got Attorney General. You got a lot that's going to be on that November ballot. Do you think Democrats have a good shot at all of those slots?
Oh, yes. I mean, let's take a look at Attorney General. Mike Cox has really been a failed Attorney General, Chuck. I mean, you look at your utility rates, your insurance rates, up. Hasn't stopped the Asian carp, just to pick one example. Really a failed Attorney General. We need to go back to the tradition of Frank Kelly, and we've got an endorsed candidate named David Layton, who is the Genesee County prosecutor. I think could make a great replacement there. We have a terrific endorsed candidate for Secretary of State in Jocelyn Benson, who has studied Secretary of State offices all around the country, and I think will restore that office. Supreme Court race, very important as well, because ultimately, among other things, redistricting gets decided in the Supreme Court.
Right.
But that court, over the years, has consistently been on the side of insurance companies and big businesses in this state, as opposed to the little guy, the worker, the consumer, the injured person. We want to change that on the court. The congressional race is very important as well, control of the Congress at issue. And, of course, with redistricting coming, we may lose a seat.
You may lose a seat, maybe more.
Here in Michigan, so there'll be that contest before the next legislature. And that leads us to the legislature then. Both houses of the legislature in their entirety up. A lot of folks term limited, a lot of folks jumping to other offices. So it's a very full slate of elections this fall.
You think you'll hold on to the House? And
we don't take anything for granted. It's always a very competitive election, and all those folks have got to go out and make their case. But we're going to do everything we can to hang on to the House and retake the Senate. Got a lot of great opportunities in the Senate. There are a lot of term-limited Republicans in districts that we can win now that the incumbent has to step aside. And we've got great candidates all over the state running for those state Senate seats.
What concerns you the most as you head into this primary?
The primary unity in the party, but I believe it will come together after the primary, not only at the top of the ticket, but down ballot. We've got a lot of primaries going on at the legislative level. But as I talk to Democrats all around the state, the organizations that make up the state party, they're all determined to come together after this primary and be united to take on the Republicans in the fall.
What role do you see national politics playing in this primary and playing here in Michigan?
Well, clearly the Republicans are going to attempt to make this a referendum about President Obama. I don't think that's the correct approach. And if that's going to be the argument, then we're going to say to them, okay, do you want to take this approach that President Obama has embarked on, fixing the economy, the terrible crisis he inherited, or do you want to go back to the failed policies of George Bush that got us into this mess in the first place, particularly here in Michigan, where we had terrible trade policies, terrible economic policies that contributed mightily to the mess that we've suffered from here in Michigan and the president has had to deal with. I'll be glad to have that debate. President Obama's policies versus the failed policies of George Bush.
You sound like a pretty optimistic person, Mark Brewer.
I'm always optimistic in my business. It's a hard fight. Again, it's a very competitive two-party state, Chuck, and anybody, pundit, political leader, who says, I guarantee a certain result in Michigan, doesn't understand Michigan politics.
The Michigan Republican Party under new leadership with Ron Weiser, your thoughts?
Well, I don't know Mr. Weiser at all, frankly. He's consistently ducked joint appearances or debates with me.
Why do you think that's the case?
I have no idea. I think it's a responsibility of the state party chairs to engage in that kind of dialogue so the voters can see and can make choices between the parties, and I regret that he declines to do that. Other than that, I don't know him very well. I know he's got quite a reputation as a fundraiser, raised a lot of money for George Bush, a big George Bush supporter. Matter of fact, so much I think that George Bush made him an ambassador.
That's true.
That's the kind of thing you get rewarded with, I guess, when you're a big fundraiser.
Mark Brewer, thank you so much for coming in. It's always a pleasure having you, and I'm sure we will get you back more between now and November. Obviously, there's a lot more politics here, and we'll see how everything shakes out on primary election day.
Thank you, Chuck. Good to be with you.
It's always a pleasure having you. And coming up, we'll sit down with Ron Weiser. He is the chair of the Michigan Republican Party. We'll be right back. We hope you stay with us. And welcome back to Spotlight. Joining me now is Ron Weiser. He is the chair of the Michigan Republican Party, and he's also the former ambassador to the Slovak Republic. Welcome to Spotlight.
Well, thanks. Good morning, Chuck.
We appreciate you coming in. The conventional wisdom, I think, is, from what I've been hearing, is that this is the Republicans' race to lose, as you're talking about the next governor of this state. Fair statement?
Fair statement.
Why? And I think you've even been quoted as saying 100% chance, 100% probability that the GOP will win.
Obviously, things can happen and things can change, but this state has been in an emergency state for the last 8 years. We've been heading downward for the last 8 years. We have had the worst unemployment in the country. We've been the leader in unemployment for most of that time period, or well over half of it. Our economy has been spiraling downwards, and there seems to be nothing that is stopping that from continuing to go. We're losing our children and grandchildren to other states. Our college graduates are leaving, and the people of Michigan are moving out. I think one family's moving out every 12 minutes. That is an emergency, and when things are going wrong, in general, people want change, and we've had a Democratic administration. Now it's time for change.
Can all that depend on the Democrats when you have a country that has had tough economic times and a recession?
Well, this was happening long before we went into the national recession. Mm-hmm. This is not something that just happened when the recession hit. That exacerbated it and really pushed us up even higher to areas we hadn't ever seen before in unemployment. So, this isn't. You can't blame the recessions on the governor and the administration, but what you can say is there's been a lack of vision, there's been a lack of focus, there's been a lack of policies, there's been a lack of a business-friendly environment that would have helped us not go as deeply into this depression as we have been.
Certainly, I know you don't want to take sides among the 5 Republicans that are running in the primary. But on the Democratic side, as you look at the two candidates that are running, size them up for me from your vantage point, and regardless of which one wins, why do you think that you'll be able to beat them?
Well, Andy Dillon has been in the state legislature, has been the speaker, and has not shown the leadership that we're going to need in a governor as the speaker. I mean, he came up with this wonderful plan to lower the cost of health care for public employees, and even as the speaker, he's not been able to get it out of committee, let alone get it up for a vote in the House of Representatives. That's not the kind of leadership we can have. He's supported the Granholm administration policies. He's supported with multiple votes job-killing tax increases that could not have come at a worse time in our economy and for the businesses of our state. So I think that as any of our candidates face him, and people are aware of his record and his background, that they're going to choose and look for a person who can lead the state into a different direction, and Andy hasn't shown that leadership.
Well, what about Virg Bernero, who might win, according to our latest poll? He's in the lead right now. Granted, it's been sort of seesaw between the two of them.
Well, Virg Bernero, unlike any of the Republican candidates, has never been in the private sector. He's been a career politician. He has, from county commissioner to aides to people in the legislature to being in now 4 different jobs in the last 7 or 8 years, political jobs. He's a professional politician. And I don't think that, and has no real world experience. I mean, you know, he's been branded the country's angriest mayor. And we don't need somebody who's angry right now. We need someone who can show leadership and who understands the private sector, because this economy will only come back when we have a business-friendly environment and we have jobs being created by the private sector. The national government has already proven that they can't be job providers. It's business that's going to have to be job providers.
Chairman Weiser, how concerned are you about the beating up that's going on within your own party, particularly between Mike Cox and Pete Hoekstra? If one of them ends up being the winner, are they going to be so beat up that they aren't going to be able to come out and really do a good job running against a Democrat?
In a lot of ways, this is good. This is, one, it gives the voters a choice. And the negative ads that have been running, we don't like them. I mean, I don't think anybody likes the idea of these negative ads being run, but that same kind of negative ad is going to come from our counterparts on the other side of the aisle when we get down to the general election. So having this out there now, there's going to be no surprises. There's no hidden last-minute revelations, or there's no areas that our own candidates aren't really pointing out to the public right now as the public makes a decision of who can best lead the state going forward.
All right, we need to get a commercial break in. We'll hurry right back with some more questions and answers with Ron Weiser, chair of the Michigan Republican Party. We'll be right back. Mr. Chairman, what role do you see the Tea Party and other organizations that say they're tired of Democrats, they're tired of Republicans playing in this race? And certainly when Mark Brewer was here, he even made the charge that the Tea Party is sort of trying to take over the Republican Party.
Well, the Republican Party has welcomed those people who call themselves or are associated with what is known as the Tea Party. It's not really a party. There's many, many organizations. There's over 30 of them across the state. That these are people who are angry. They are people who want less government in their lives. They're not anti-government, but they want to live their lives on their own in a way that they feel they're not being allowed to do. They felt that Obamacare was an intrusion on their lives. That's one of the things that really motivated them. But they share principles and ideals with the Republican Party. I mean, they're for limited government and balancing the budget and not operating with a deficit. They're for these things, as the Republican Party is. And so we've welcomed them in. We've asked them to run as precinct delegates. We want them to come to the convention. We want them to be part of what we're doing. Unfortunately, someone has, as you know, created a Tea Party, filed it. These are not people that any of the groups that we've talked to across the state, any of the 30 groups, the people who are heading this up, they don't know who they are. It's a fake Tea Party. And it is the Democrats who are perpetrating a fraud on the voters because they're putting Tea Party candidates on the ballot, and yet the Tea Party doesn't want to run any candidates. They're putting on the ballot, and they've only put them on the ballot in Senate and House districts and in races that are going to be the ones that are going to be the focus races and the most highly competitive. So this kind of thing is a very unfair thing to the voters of the state.
You've sort of made it a policy as you've taken over the Michigan Republican Party to not do joint appearances with Mark Brewer, the chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. Why we had wanted to put the two of you together. He certainly has said he's more than willing to sit down with you and go toe-to-toe. Why have you kind of made that a policy?
Well, we come at this from different directions. I mean, he's a paid political operative. I mean, he has, you know, he's paid by the unions through consulting contracts and by the Democrat Party. I'm a volunteer. I'm doing this as a public servant. As I've been since I left my business, which I founded 42 years ago, 9 years ago. That's what I've done. It's public service, and so we come at this from different places, and I felt it was important that distinction be maintained.
As you head into the fall, is there a particular Democratic candidate that you would want to face, one more than the other?
I think the voters will be able to see the distinction and will understand that any of our candidates will be able to lead us in a different direction than we've been.
And how do you feel the Republican Party will do with some of the other races that will be on the November ballot, Attorney General, Secretary of State, et cetera?
Well, I think we're in a good position, as I said. I mean, our voters are the most enthused that anyone has ever seen. I mean, all of our events across the state, our Lincoln Day dinners, our county party conventions, our county events, I mean, we have double and triple the attendance that we've ever had before. I mean, there is really a concern about the direction of the state. And by the way, at those events, and I've been at many of them, you'll see people walking around with their Tea Party buttons on. So they're coming to our events. They've been welcomed, and they're joining us in this effort to change the direction of the state.
All right, Mr. Ambassador, Chairman Weiser, thank you for joining us today on Spotlight. It's a pleasure having you. And we'll wait and see what happens on primary election day, and we'll certainly welcome to get you back here.
Well, I look forward to that, Chuck, and just like you, I'm waiting for election day, and I'm waiting for those 93 days till we can get the change started in this state.
All right, thank you so much for coming in.
Real pleasure. Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you. And we want to thank you at home for joining us. I'm Chuck Stokes. We'll be back next week with more newsmakers in the Spotlight. Don't forget to vote on Tuesday, August the 3rd, primary election day. Have a great week.
This Week is next on 7.